Chapter 759. Based on agriculture, industry, commerce, and light industry. This was the way Yang Chendong chose to develop the economy. Vast land and abundant resources were naturally a characteristic of the Central Plains. However, don't forget that there was a large population behind it. If one wanted to support so many people, just collecting taxes from the land would not solve the fundamental problem. On the contrary, it would increase the burden of the people. Therefore, from the beginning, Yang Chendong only collected a small amount of land tax symbolically. Instead, he focused on commercial development. Merchants were engaged in trade. They played the game of buying at a low price and selling at a high price. Relatively speaking, they were considered as mental workers. Such people not only contributed less, but they also earned more. Compared to the farmers who faced the yellow soil with their backs facing the sky, the investment and harvest of both sides were completely not proportional. This ratio may not be seen in a short period of time. However, as time passed, the contradictions would inevitably begin to deepen. Once the gap between the rich and the poor was widened, all kinds of problems would emerge one after another. Facts also prove that when every dynasty was first established, the social order was very good. However, as it continued to develop, there were more and more unfair things. In the end, society became more and more chaotic until one day, when it could no longer be suppressed, it was replaced by a new dynasty. In order to avoid income inequality and too big of a gap, Yang Chendong adopted a heavy tax on businesses and a small land tax on farmers. Although this could not completely avoid the existence of the gap, at least it was controlled to a relatively acceptable level. Only by walking on two legs could society develop normally and continuously improve. Naturally, while imposing heavy taxes, Yang Chendong also gave a certain amount of respect to businesses. Just like in terms of social status, they were constantly being raised. This was contrary to the national policy of the Great Ming Dynasty. In the Great Ming Dynasty, the status of merchants was so low that it was even lower than the ordinary people. In the eyes of others, they were people who reaped without sowing. They were unscrupulous people who talked about money and were disgraced by others. However, in the territory controlled by Yang Xie, merchants were quite respected because they paid a heavy tax to society. This was equivalent to making a great contribution. With the rise in status, more and more businessmen were willing to come to Yang Xie's territory to develop their businesses. As a matter of fact, they earned quite a bit. After all, the goods produced by Crimson City were so novel, high quality, and few in number. It could be said that the demand exceeded the supply. It could be said that in the environment at that time, as long as one had the means to obtain the goods produced in Crimson City, one would not have to worry about selling them. The only difference was how high the price of the goods could be. If it had to be summed up in 8 words, it would be that there was no highest, only higher. Business was so profitable that it had become an important cornerstone of Yang Xie's development. Even so, how could Yang Chendong let go of such a good opportunity so easily? At the beginning of the construction of the first city, he had planned out a commercial street. He waited for the cement and steel bars to arrive from the Crimson City by sea to begin construction. Then, a large number of goods began to fill this street, causing it to quickly become prosperous and lively. This was exactly what Zhang Quan and Su Dei saw. They were surprised to find that even though it was snowing heavily outside, it was still very cold. But in the commercial street, it was indeed a bustling scene. People were squeezing and huddling together. From afar, it was as bustling as the center of the capital. If there had to be a difference, it would be that the clothes of the people here were very different from those in the capital of Baiming. Here, they could see merchants wearing all kinds of strange clothes. Most of them were Mongolian merchants, and there might be merchants from further regions and countries. But what surprised Zhang Quan was that he also saw merchants from the Great Ming Dynasty here. Why would merchants from the Great Ming Dynasty appear in the grassland? Could it be that they had secretly joined the Mongolian tribe? With such doubts, Zhang Quan personally walked up to a merchant who was wearing the same clothes as the people of the Great Ming Dynasty. They seemed to be chatting, but at the same time, they seemed to be asking something. The merchant did not know Zhang Quan's true identity. He only felt that this person gave him a feminine feeling. But the other party spoke the language of the Great Ming Dynasty, and this could not be fake. Moreover, the other party's clothes were the same as his. Since they were both from the Great Ming Dynasty, the merchant had a natural sense of closeness. Under Zhang Quan's intention, the two sides quickly chatted, and the conversation was very congenial. After nearly half an hour, Zhang Quan returned to Su Dei's side, but his expression was somewhat ugly. "Eunuch Zhang, what's going on? Why is there a merchant from the Great Ming Dynasty here?" Su Dei had been curious for a long time, and finally had the opportunity to ask. "He is indeed a merchant from the Great Ming Dynasty, and he is from our Baiming." Zhang Quan's status was naturally higher than Su Dei's, but considering that he still needed the other party to ensure his safety this time, he did not hide anything. He did not join the Mongolian tribe, nor did he join the Duke of Zhongdan. He is buying goods here because he wants to sell them back to our Baiming. Ah! Buying goods from the grassland and selling them back to Baiming? This can take more than 20 days. Hearing this answer, Su Dei was also shocked and said with a puzzled expression. "But our Baiming no longer has any goods. Or rather, we have goods, but they are controlled by those aristocratic families and important ministers in the imperial court. Small merchants like this have no share at all." They also heard about what happened in the beginning city, and they also heard that as long as they have money, they can get the goods here. Moreover, as real Han people, they can get a 5% discount when they get the goods. Driven by benefits, they will come even if they are far away. Zhang Quan said this expressionlessly, but in fact, his heart was bleeding. Speaking of which, Zhang Quan was able to become the eunuch guarding the Datong prefecture, and he also had a backer in the palace. Even his name was in the heart of the Daizong Zhu Qiu, and he could be considered to be in the privileged class. However, he was also in the privileged class, and he still had to be divided into factions. He was very pessimistic about some of the influential people in the capital. Some people only relied on the power in their hands to do some things that took advantage of others. Once there was a problem, they might not have the ability to solve the problem. Even so, these people who did not have much ability and only knew how to play tricks had a prosperous career. Some of them even received the favor of the emperor, which made Zhang Quan even more furious. With this understanding and now hearing this merchant's words, it was no wonder that his expression became very bad. Zhang Quan saw something deeper, which was the decay and decline of the Great Ming Dynasty. Although it was a small matter, it did give him a different feeling. Here, all he saw was prosperity, youthfulness, and hope. Su Dei was only a Jianghu. Perhaps he could not think of so many things, but he also knew that in the long run, the influence of the beginning city would grow bigger and bigger. One day, it would have the power to replace the Great Ming Dynasty. While the two of them were still lamenting in their hearts, a mercenary soldier in military green suddenly came. "My lords, our city lord invites you." Was he finally going to see the city lord? Zhang Quan nodded to Su Dei and then said, "Please lead the way." This journey was very far, and they were 5 miles away from the city. Fortunately, horses had been prepared here, and the road had been completely cleared to ensure that they could travel unimpeded. Even so, after driving for nearly half an hour, they arrived at their destination. They came to a vegetable greenhouse area covered with plastic films. The soldier who led the way took out a special token that emitted a silver light from his body. No one stopped them all the way. When they finally arrived in front of a large shed area, he got off his horse, pointed to a large shed area, and said, "My lords, our city lord is inside. Please." Zhang Quan and Su Dei got off their horses and did not bring any entourage. In fact, not everyone could enter this shed. The two of them followed the soldier into the shed, and the first feeling they had was warmth. Compared to the cold weather outside, not only was the air here fresher, but the climate was also very pleasant, giving people the feeling that the 4 seasons were like spring. What greeted their eyes was not a white expanse, but was completely replaced by green. At this moment, Yuan, who was in front of a cucumber rack, turned his head with a smile on his face. He greeted them warmly, "Eunuch Zhang, Jianghu Su, you're here." Before they came, they knew that the city lord of the beginning city was called Yuan. He was the eldest son of Yu Qian, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. For this matter, the embroidered uniform guards and the East faction guards had also made a report to the imperial court. The general idea was that they suspected that Yu Qian's disappearance had a lot to do with the mercenaries. However, everything was just a guess. Without any evidence, this matter was still unknown in the end. Now that he finally saw Yuan, the first thing Zhang Quan said was, "How is City Lord Yu? But I wonder if Assistant Minister Yu is doing well?" In the face of this obvious test, Yuan chuckled and replied politely, "My father is doing well. Thank you for your concern, Eunuch Zhang. Oh right, it's your first time here. How do you feel about our shed area?" He did not say much about Yu Qian's matter. This was also the result of Yuan asking Yang Chendong for advice. He knew that since Baiming had sent people here this time, they would definitely be interested in his identity. Naturally, they would not be able to avoid his father. When he asked about Yang Chendong, the answer he received was, half hidden, half revealed. After fully understanding this sentence, Yuan knew that even if he wanted to say that his father was still alive, he could not tell them what he had done. Thus, he came up with this answer. Yuan took the initiative to change the topic, and Zhang Quan sighed in his heart. He knew that this question would end here. Not to mention whether it would cause trouble for him if he asked, he was afraid that the other party would not answer him even if he asked. Chapter 760. Fortunately, Zhang Quan was a smart person. He knew what could be said more and what could not be said at all. Therefore, he went along with the flow and said that the greenhouse was very good. It was really a cheerful thing to be able to see these fresh vegetables in the cold winter. After a round of praises, Zhang Quan asked casually, "City Lord Yu, may I know how much space these greenhouses will take up?" "Not much, only 2,000 mu." Yuan stroked his beard that had not grown long ago and sighed. To be honest, 2,000 mu was not considered small. This was even because of Yang Chendong's suggestion. When he first heard that they were going to grow vegetables in winter, Yuan only thought of 100 mu. That way, even if there were any accidents, there would not be any problems. In the end, it was Yang Chendong who spoke. Considering that the shed tubes and plastic films transported from Qian City could only make 2,000 mu, he decided on this number. Now, it seemed that they had planted too little. If they had known that there would be such a good result, they would not have found it too much even if they doubled it. Just like now, these vegetables had matured. Whether it was transported to the military camp or sold in the market, they were all very popular items. The high price had already allowed them to recover their initial investment. If they sold all of them, just this alone would bring a lot of benefits and income to the first city. Especially when Yang Chendong made a move again and came up with such a good thing like a vacuum bag. Once the vegetables were placed in it, it could guarantee that the quality of the vegetables would not be damaged for a certain period of time. This could allow them to be transported to further places. Of course, after being equipped with a vacuum bag, the price of the vegetables was not ordinary. Often, only the leaders of some nearby Mongolian tribes could afford to eat them. However, at that time, this was already considered a miracle. After all, although the vacuum bag was not valuable, it was indeed something that no one else could produce except for the factories in Qian City. When Zhang Quan heard that one of them was 2,000 mu, he could not help but sigh. The Duke of Loyal and Bold is really generous. Huh, come on. Since we're here, I'll show you around. Then, you'll personally pick the ripe vegetables. We'll choose to have lunch here. Yuan seemed to be in a good mood and greeted them warmly. Zhang Quan and Su Dei each had a basket of vegetables in their hands. Although the two of them didn't have high positions, they hadn't personally picked vegetables for a long time. It was a fresh experience for them, and the greenhouse was filled with cheers and laughter. At noon, the vegetables they picked were placed on the table. With the chef's help, some pork was added. In the end, the three of them ate until they were full. During the meal, the guests and the host enjoyed themselves to the fullest, but after the meal, the atmosphere quickly cooled down. Because they all knew that it was time for negotiation, and it was time for them to state their conditions. There was a war of words going on in the tent area. In the Yang mansion in the beginning city, Yang Chendong was standing in front of the sand table and looking at it carefully. He had been standing here since lunch, and it had been nearly an hour since he finished his lunch. What is the sixth young master doing? Xiao Vi, the captain of the first guard on duty, finally couldn't help but ask when he saw Yang Chendong standing there for a long time without moving. To become a member of the guard, loyalty was essential, not to mention physical fitness, but the most important thing was that they had to keep their mouths shut. Often by the sixth young master's side, it was inevitable that they would come into contact with some confidential matters. They had to know what could be said and what could not be said. Even the ordinary members knew about this, not to mention Cho Wu, who was the captain. However, he still asked. It was probably because there was only young heir in front of him. Moreover, he was indeed curious about this matter. I don't know. Beta Persei shook his head. Obviously, he couldn't see what the young master was doing. However, his intuition told him that the young master must have thought of something again. Perhaps something big would happen soon. Beta Persei was indeed someone who had been by Yang Chendong's side for many years. This time, he guessed correctly. After some time, Yang Chendong finally moved his body and said to Beta Persei, "Go and call Su Yunsheng over." Su Yunsheng, the commander of the reconnaissance battalion. Although his rank was not very high, he was someone whom Yang Chendong trusted very much. After being found by the guards, he immediately rushed to the Yang mansion and came to the hall. Take a good look at this place. I want to know the details of his situation. Go and do it. Yang Chendong pointed to a place called Talos City on the sand table and ordered Su Yunsheng. Su Yunsheng left. Since it was an order from the sixth young master, he naturally didn't dare to be careless. He immediately sent the most elite force of the reconnaissance battalion to investigate Talos City. Not long after he left the Yang mansion, City Lord Yuan rushed over to report on his work. Sixth young master, we had a preliminary meeting, but the results weren't very satisfactory. Well, since it's a negotiation, naturally there won't be a result so soon. It's just that we can't wait any longer. How about this? Go and find them again tomorrow and tell them that we'll only give them 3 days. If they can't reach an agreement, then they can go back to where they came from. Yang Chendong spoke as if he had seen through everything. 3 days? Hearing this answer, Yuan was stunned. This time requirement was a bit too tight. Of course, he was more worried that with only 3 days, it would be difficult to reach an agreement. Yang Chendong seemed to see through his worries and chuckled. Don't worry, go and talk. They should have a change tonight. In the inn, it was already dark. All the Baiming soldiers began to return to their teams. Then, all kinds of reports were continuously reported. The Baiming soldiers were not like the Cold Front warriors. All of them were capable in both civil and military matters. Many of them were illiterate. The so-called reports were mostly verbal reports. Zhang Quan and Su Dei listened to them talk about what they had seen in the city in the largest room in the inn. However, after only meeting a dozen Dekarches, Zhang Quan waved his hand in annoyance. All right, tell them that there's no need to report anymore. I think they've seen the same thing. Zhang Quan was annoyed because all the Baiming soldiers who came to report were talking about the benefits of the beginning city. For example, the prosperity of this place. For example, the treatment of the soldiers here was good, the food was good, and the equipment was complete. For example, the people here were full of vitality. The people here didn't scold the army and only praised them. According to what these soldiers said, the beginning city was close to becoming a perfect city. Those who could live in this city, whether it was the soldiers or the people, were the happiest people in the world. In that case, what was the Datong mansion? What was the Baiming mansion? What was the Baiming capital? It was no wonder that Zhang Quan was so angry that he sent all of them away. Although he had long seen that the beginning city was extraordinary, now that everyone said this, it was still a little beyond his expectations. He was even wondering if it was right to let them out during the day. If this continued, the morale of the army would be affected. Eunuch Zhang, I think it's better to let them stay in the inn tomorrow. Su Dei also saw the hidden danger and carefully reminded him. I think it's okay. Zhang Quan glanced at Su Dei. He knew that the other party had the same worries and concerns as him, so he nodded. If this went on, he was really worried that the soldiers he brought would fall in love with this place and become deserters. If that happened, it would really be a huge loss of face. At this moment, Zhang Quan finally knew why the mercenaries allowed him to bring all the soldiers into the city instead of arranging a residence for them outside the city. As a result, no one stopped these soldiers from watching the show in the city. He thought about how he whimsically released all the soldiers in order to find out where the loopholes in the city were. He even had the opportunity to let them come into contact with the mercenaries and see if he could persuade them to work for him. But now, his soldiers had almost rebelled. Now that he thought about it, he had really shot himself in the foot. The beginning city had this kind of attraction. The more you knew, the easier it was to be roped in by them. In view of this, Zhang Quan and Su Dei came to the same conclusion. Tomorrow, they would imprison the soldiers and not allow them to walk on the streets freely. Early the next morning, the order was issued and immediately caused many soldiers to be unhappy. Many of them had heard yesterday that the mercenaries' publicity team would have a program today, and it was said that it would be very interesting. This was very tempting for the Baiming soldiers who had been guarding the border. Among them, Nie Zhengyi was the one who shouted the loudest. Nie Zhengyi was 25 years old. He was only 3 years older than Yang Chendong, but he was already a centurion. Like many soldiers guarding the border, Nie Zhengyi was born in a military family. This meant that he was destined to only be a soldier in his life. He had no other choice. Fortunately, although he was born in the same family, he seemed to like to join the army. He was the king of children since he was young. When he grew up, he also had a burly figure. After joining the army, he did not make it in time for the Battle of Tumu Fort. However, when Yes Hen led the Walla soldiers into the Hatao area and even wanted to invade Datong, he did participate in the battle. In that battle, he killed 4 enemies and captured 1 alive. He was forcefully promoted from the position of a squad leader to a centurion. It was precisely because of his military exploits that he had obtained everything he had that he was highly respected among the soldiers. At least in the centurion he led, everyone was willing to listen to him. Yesterday, he also heard from the people in the city that the publicity team would perform a program tomorrow. He also heard from the people that the actors in the publicity team were all young and beautiful. They had good figures and the performance was also very good. As the saying went, which young girl did not yearn for love and which man did not fall in love with women? Chapter 761. After all, Nie Zhengyi was a young man of 25 years old. He was quite handsome, especially his head. Girls would often blush when they saw his body. However, he was still single. Speaking of which, the border army at that time wasn't that poor. In addition, the imperial court also had to consider the continuation of the army's household. For this reason, they were very concerned about the marriage of the soldiers. When a young lad reached that age, as long as he wanted to, he still had the ability to marry a woman. Jianghu could only blame himself for being too good. He had always wanted to find a good-looking, kind-hearted, and good lady. There were ladies in the Datong prefecture, but young and beautiful ones were rare. Even if there were, they might not be interested in Jianghu's family background. As time passed, the days passed. When he was 25 years old, he was still unmarried. How could he not be moved when he found out that there was going to be a performance by such a young man? However, the fact that he could become a centurion proved that he wasn't an ordinary soldier. He was a scheming person. When he heard Zhang Quan and Su Dei announce that they weren't allowed to leave the inn today, he didn't react strongly. Instead, he remained silent, giving people the impression that he was very supportive of this decision. "You guys, be careful. Watch those who are jumping around. I will deal with them when I return tonight." After receiving news from the city lord's mansion that the peace talks would continue today, Su Dei instructed his centurions before leaving the inn. Jianghu was one of them. The centurions naturally nodded in response to the Kiliarcha's orders. After the two of them left, most of the centurions returned to their rooms to sleep. Only 2 centurions were left on duty. Coincidentally, Jianghu was one of them. Jianghu's heart felt like it was on fire. He didn't know why, but he wanted to see what the performance was all about. With this thought in mind, he began to rack his brain, wondering if he should find an opportunity to take a short break. However, when his gaze fell on the entrance of the inn, he realized that there was a squad leader leading a group of 10 people guarding the entrance. He immediately dismissed the idea of forcing his way out. It wasn't that Jianghu didn't have the courage to fight 1 against 10. On the contrary, these ordinary Baiming soldiers were nothing in his eyes. However, he had to consider that once he made a move, he would immediately alert the other centurions. If that happened, no matter how powerful he was, he would not be a match for dozens of centurions. If it were someone else, they might have given up on such an idea. Jianghu was different. Ever since he was a child, he had always been a righteous person. Once he decided on something, he would definitely do it. In the end, he came up with an idea. "I can't rush out alone, but what if there are many people? If everyone rushed out together, no one would be able to stop them." The most important thing was that once everyone rushed out, even if Su Dei knew about it later, he wouldn't blame himself. After all, the law couldn't punish the masses. With an idea in mind, Jianghu went to the room of the soldiers who were shouting the loudest with the excuse of patrolling. After that, he gave a speech of generosity. The gist of it was that if they didn't grab hold of some things now, they might not have any hope in their entire lives. Since that was the case, they had to do it even if they had to be scolded behind their backs. Everyone originally had this idea. Now that Jianghu brought it up, they were all overjoyed. After that, he went to the centurion under his control and had a heart-to-heart talk with the soldiers below. After an hour, a small riot began. Caught off guard, the guards who were just putting on a show were pushed to the ground. In an instant, about 300 people walked out of the inn. These people were relatively more courageous or had made up their minds to watch the show. In any case, Jianghu had said that the law couldn't punish the masses. When 30% of the people suddenly ran out, the other centurions were frightened. They hurriedly rushed to the city lord's residence to report to Zhang Quan and Su Dei. In the city lord's residence, Yuan had already expressed Yang Chendong's intentions. The negotiations would only last for 3 days. If there were no results, then the people from Baiming would have to leave. Zhang Quan and Su Dei had nothing to say about Yuan's domineering aura. This time, they had taken the initiative to rush over to negotiate. Strictly speaking, they were seeking benefits. Now that they were not welcomed, how could they be angry? Since ancient times, it had always been the strong who had the right to speak. With only 3 days left, Zhang Quan did not dare to be careless. He seized every moment to negotiate with Yuan. He had already expressed his intention to give in. He had forgotten that just yesterday, he had proposed to allow Bai Ming's army to be stationed in the first city. He had the intention of requisitioning this place and making it the front line of Bai Ming. This request was also discussed by Zhang Quan and Sun Hong before they came. It was also the best goal that they hoped to achieve. However, it was a pity that Yuan directly rejected it. He only replied with 3 words, impossible. Yuan did not show the slightest sign of weakness. On the contrary, he became the dominant party. He said that the mercenaries occupied the first city and had already dealt a heavy blow to the Tatar forces, the Agadorji tribe and the Mabe Mongolian tribe. Based on this, Bai Ming should pay them. It did not matter how much the military pay was. Yang Chendong wanted to discuss the other party. Besides, if Bai Ming gave the first city 1 tael of silver, then the army would have 1 tael of silver less. This was a matter of decreasing one's losses and increasing one's gains. No matter how much they did, it would never be too much. Zhang Quan naturally expressed a clear rejection of Yuan's request. In his words, most of the money from Bai Ming's imperial court was used to develop firearms and train the new army. Even the Datong city's military pay could not be truthfully spent. How could there be any money left to give to the first city? All in all, the first negotiation between the two sides was like a lion opening its mouth. At the same time, it was also testing the other party's bottom line. Relatively speaking, today's negotiation was much more pragmatic. Especially after knowing that the negotiation time was only 3 days, Zhang Quan put down his arrogance. He did not mention those impossible requests to stimulate the two sides. Instead, he put forward some practical requests and conditions for the two sides to be allies. The negotiation began to enter the normal track. When the attitude of both sides began to become gentle, suddenly, a soldier outside the door reported that 2 centurions from the Bai Ming army had come. They said that they had important matters to discuss with Zhang Quan and Su Dei. The negotiation had to be terminated because of this. Yang Mansion. The 4-man post at the door became an 8-man post. At the same time, the number of patrolling soldiers on the streets of the first city began to increase. Even the divisions and regiments that were training in the ice and snow outside the city also gathered and returned to the city. All kinds of signs indicated that something big must have happened in the city. Yang Chendong was in the warm study room. Beta Persei, who was standing beside him, was reporting the situation to him. "Young master, I heard that 300 people escaped from the Bai Ming army. They suddenly disappeared." As soon as he received the news, Lord Yu increased the speed and strength of the patrols in the city. Our Yang Mansion has also made sufficient preparations. The troops that were training outside the city are also returning to the city. Director Feng of the Security Bureau is dispatching people to secretly search for them. After reporting all the information he knew in one breath, Beta Persei took a breath and then waited for Yang Chendong's instructions. 300 people escaped? What's going on? Yang Chendong's expression became serious at this moment. If this was Bai Ming's plan, these 300 people were likely to cause chaos in the city. Of course, it was only 300 people. In a city with a population of more than 50,000 people and an army of more than 30,000 people, it was not a big deal. According to the Security Bureau in the inn, it was because many Bai Ming soldiers were very interested in the show performed by our publicity team. They wanted to watch the show, but the higher-ups did not allow it, so they escaped privately. Beta Persei scratched his head and said a reason that was not a reason. What? At this moment, even Yang Chendong was confused by these words. Just to watch a performance, 300 people had disappeared. This was indeed beyond his expectations, and it made him feel like it was child's play. Beta Persei also felt ridiculous when he first heard the news. But since it was reported by the Security Bureau and reported to the sixth young master, it should not be wrong. Who would dare to joke about such a big thing? This was a very serious problem. Yes, that's what was reported. Young master, what do you think? Beta Persei carefully asked Yang Chendong how to deal with it. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he fell into deep thought for a while. After a while, Yang Chendong seemed to have made up his mind and said, Beta Persei, go and see where the publicity team is performing today. Find those people and arrest them all. Okay. Beta Persei became excited when he heard that there was a chance to make a move. By the way, young master, how many people can I bring? Take 10 guards with you, then ask Tiger Mang for a battalion of soldiers. That should be enough. Isn't it just 300 Baiming soldiers? By the way, don't make too much noise when you arrest them. Bring them back when you find them. Yang Chendong chuckled. He obviously had a general idea in his mind. Since Baiming himself had such a loophole, he would certainly take advantage of it. He wanted to know something from these soldiers. Beta Persei did not know the specific thoughts in Yang Chendong's mind, but since it was an order from the sixth young master, he just had to execute it to the letter. He nodded and agreed. After a while, he turned around and left the inner court. Chapter 762. Brother Beta Persei, what are you doing in such a hurry? Did something good happen? Seeing Beta Persei's anxious look, Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu, who were not on duty, saw it. The relationship between the two of them had always been good and they were always inseparable. Seeing the two of them, Beta Persei's eyes lit up. The sixth young master gave me a task and I'm going to complete it. How about this, both of you, and 8 brothers will come together. Fuyun Restaurant was one of the top 5 restaurants in the beginning city. It covered an area of more than 10,000 square meters and had more than 200 tables. In particular, there was a large open space in the middle of the restaurant with a cement floor. It was perfect for performing some large-scale programs. As early as a month ago, Fuyun Restaurant had contacted the publicity department and wanted to invite them to perform in the restaurant. Today was the official day. Since the morning, all the tables in the restaurant had been occupied. Even so, there were still many people who wanted to buy a place to stand with silver. For a moment, the restaurant owner was so happy that he could not close his mouth. At about 9 o'clock in the morning, the staff of the publicity department who were ready at the back of the restaurant had already made all the preparations. As the director, Shui Qing kept walking in front of the girls of the publicity department, repeatedly telling them not to be nervous. When the performance started, they just had to perform according to the usual rehearsal. A group of very beautiful girls, each of them wearing the military uniform of the Cold Front, with beautiful berets on their heads, looked valiant and heroic. Today, they were going to perform the scene where the god of war commanded the army to defeat Agadorji of the Tartar tribe. Of course, they could not perform the entire scene. They only chose the moment when the entire army charged. In order to achieve a sufficient stage effect, Shui Qing mobilized a total of 220 girls of the publicity department. In other words, not only were all the 200 students recruited later on, but also some of the cultural backbone staff from Crimson City. This was to create a magnificent scene with many soldiers and generals. Since everyone had to go on stage, Kikij was naturally one of them. Not only did she have to go on stage, but she also had to appear as a character with status and lines. Kikij had a heavy responsibility on her shoulders. The reason why she was able to stand out so quickly was inseparable from her usual hard work, and naturally, it was inseparable from her current identity. As for Beta Persei, after he fell in love with Kikij, he told everything to the sixth young master. After getting his consent, he asked for advice on what to do. Perhaps in his eyes, the sixth young master was omnipotent. The answer given by Yang Chendong was simple: chase after her. To put it bluntly, he had to be thick-skinned, show more concern, and interact more. After a round of pestering, his chances of success would increase by a lot. This was the reason why a good girl was afraid of a pestering man. Beta Persei naturally carried out Yang Chendong's orders to the letter. Whenever he had time, he would come to the publicity office. At the very beginning, it was under the pretext of inspecting work, but after a long time, even Shui Qing knew that this favorite of the sixth young master liked the little girl Kikage. Naturally, he gave the green light. When everyone knew about this matter, Kikage's identity and status also stood out. Even Director Shui Qing was polite to her, because everyone knew how powerful pillow talk was. Fifth brother Yang had a high position and power in Crimson City, not to mention brother Beta Persei, who was in a higher position than him. With Shui Qing's care, coupled with her dancing foundation, her figure was very good, and her appearance was very decent. It was impossible for Kikage not to stand out. This time, she was entrusted with a heavy responsibility and arranged to play a very good role. This was not the first time Kikage had gone on stage. A week ago, she had performed for a while in the largest Immortal abode restaurant in the first city, and her performance at that time was very good. But this did not prevent her from being nervous this time. Before going on stage, she was still constantly taking deep breaths, forcing herself to calm down. The backstage was nervously and orderly preparing. The hall of the Fuyun building was even more crowded. Nie Zhengyi and the others, who were mixed in the crowd, were anxiously waiting. They rushed out of the inn, and then came to the Fuyun building at the fastest speed. At the door, they paid a certain amount of silver. It could be said that after taking out all the silver they had the opportunity to squeeze in. Speaking of which, he was lucky to have some silver on him. Compared to some of the other Baiming soldiers who had escaped, most of them were blocked outside the restaurant because they did not have enough silver. If they were in the Datong prefecture, perhaps those soldiers would find ways to cause trouble to express their dissatisfaction, but when they saw the mercenary warriors standing in front of the Fuyun building, they did not have any thoughts of causing trouble. This was other people's territory, and they were facing the legendary elite mercenary warriors. They really did not have the courage to test the law. Finally, it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and the performance began. On the 300 square meter concrete stage, a loud horn sounded, and 60 to 70 warriors, with excellent figures rushed from the backstage to the performance platform. One flag after another was waved in their hands. Just this appearance alone attracted waves of cheers from the people below the stage. Perhaps it was because of the tall and straight figures of the female soldiers, or perhaps it was because the heroic spirit on their faces was not much inferior to the men, or perhaps it was because of their good looks, but they received a full house of applause as soon as they went on stage. Among the people who cheered were Nie Zhengyi and some of his companions. Amidst the cheers, the female soldiers with lines began their performance. Through their mouths, they explained the matter of the Tatar army besieging the city with nearly 50,000 soldiers. Then, they showed that the mercenary warriors were not afraid of difficulties, were not afraid of life and death, and were brave enough to fight. After all, it was a performance. Due to the influence of the venue and the surrounding environment, it was impossible to perfectly show every battle. It was just a description of some special battles. But even so, it still made the audience below the stage very excited. Cheers came one after another, and it didn't stop from the beginning. Fuyun restaurant was very lively. Outside the restaurant, Beta Persei arrived with 10 guards and a battalion of 400 soldiers from the independent regiment. Since Beta Persei was personally mobilizing the troops, Deputy Regiment Commander Xin Honghai naturally had to cooperate. He personally led a battalion of soldiers to express his sincerity. When they arrived outside the restaurant, they saw more than 200 soldiers wearing the Baiming army uniform outside the door. Arrest them all, kill those who resist. Beta Persei only glanced at them for a moment before issuing the military order. Immediately, the soldiers led by him rushed towards the Baiming soldiers who were still stretching their necks, trying to make a move in the restaurant. Before they could figure out what was going on, these soldiers had become prisoners. Some of the brave Baiming soldiers did not resist when they saw that the mercenary warriors were arresting them. They only shouted, "Why are you arresting us? We followed the Baiming messengers to your place. You can't treat us like this." Their reply was to gag them and then take them away on the street. They were all tied up and had black cloth gagged over their mouths. More than 200 people did not resist and quickly disappeared outside the restaurant. Beta Persei did not even look at these people. He only stared at the inside of Fuyan restaurant and asked the company commander in charge of the security of the propaganda department, how many Baiming soldiers entered the restaurant. About 60 or 70 people. They are very easy to recognize. They are all wearing the Baiming uniform. The company commander stood at attention, saluted and replied respectfully. "Good, you guys guard outside. If you find any Baiming soldiers who have escaped, take them down immediately. If there is any resistance, you can take measures." Hearing that so many people had entered the restaurant, Beta Persei's eyes darkened, and a murderous aura emanated from his body. This time, there was Kikage in the performance. Last night, she had someone send a message to him, hoping that he could come and watch her performance. Just from this point alone, the progress of their relationship was still very smooth. However, Beta Persei did not immediately agree. Following by Yang Chendong's side was a heavy responsibility, and he could not even grasp his own free time. But now, 60 or 70 Baiming soldiers were in the restaurant. If they had the intention of destroying this performance, wouldn't Kikage be in danger? He thought that if someone really did that, he would not mind starting a massacre. I hope you guys are just watching a performance. If you have other ideas, you will definitely regret coming to this world. After making up his mind, Beta Persei called the deputy commander of the independent regiment, Xin Honghai. After discussing with him, they decided on a plan to enter the restaurant and capture the people. It's best not to make a move if you can. After all, there are still many people inside who are watching the show. Thinking that the sixth young master was very protective of the people under his rule, Yang Chendong reminded everyone to wait. At this time, inside the Fuyan restaurant, the performance had already lasted for more than an hour and was now coming to an end. They had broken the Tatar army's attack and defeated the enemy. Now was the time to cheer for the victory. The sun sets in the west, the red clouds fly in the sky. The soldiers are shooting, the camp is back, the camp is back, comrades in arms are as close as brothers. Victory has summoned us together. You are from Tiannan, he is from Hebei. We are all brothers of the god of war. One after another, military songs that stirred the hearts of the people resounded on the stage. Under the chorus of the actresses, who were full of 5 tones, it brought climax after climax to the people present. The people who were encouraged by the performance clapped their hands until they were red, but the applause still continued. Jianghu was also mixed in the crowd. His eyes were shining, and his heart was filled with excitement. After watching this performance, Jianghu was deeply encouraged. Although time was limited, such a novel performance was the first time he had seen in his life. This kind of performance method was unheard of in the future. Even if the time was short, it still made him extremely excited and even deeply affected. Chapter 763. This was a real army. They were fearless in the face of a strong enemy and used all means on the battlefield. The soldiers were united and sincere. Only those who grew up in such an army could be called a real soldier. Only those who grew up in such an army could talk about great ideals. In comparison, the Baiming Datong prefecture he was in was far inferior. They only dared to attack when the enemy was few and far in between, as if they were afraid of angering the other party. When the enemy came in large numbers, they would turn around and flee without even fighting. They didn't have the slightest bit of courage to face difficulties. Anyone with ability and ideas could determine the strength of the enemy. At this moment, Nie Zhengyi's eyes were filled with envy. But when he thought about how he was a member of the Baiming army, and a centurion at that, the hot blood that had surged out of his body was forcefully suppressed. Sigh, this is just a dream. In the future, it's better to go back and be a centurion. Sighing like this, Nie Zhengyi slowly lowered his head. It was unknown whether he was lamenting his bad luck or lamenting that he was born at the wrong time. At this moment, a strong murderous aura suddenly attacked him. Nie Zhengyi, who had practiced martial arts since he was young and had a good physique, instinctively dodged to the left. A large hand slid down where he was standing just now. Thinking that it was close, he suddenly turned around and saw a soldier in a green military uniform standing behind him. At this moment, both sides looked at each other and saw each other clearly. The soldier from the independent regiment felt a burst of red in his face that his attack had failed. Seeing that most of his comrades had succeeded in one strike, reaching out to control the target he was staring at, but he had failed, this feeling made him very unhappy. Brat, I don't care who you are. If you surrender now, you can still live. If you resist, you'll be asking for trouble. Since the sneak attack had failed, the soldier from the independent regiment didn't hold back and directly put forward his own request. No matter what, Nie Zhengyi was still a centurion. How could he allow himself to be captured just because of one sentence? Although he had disobeyed a military order this time, it should be Chiliarch Su Dei who came forward to capture him. How could it be a mercenary army that made a move on him? I didn't cause any trouble. Why are you arresting me? He would not allow himself to be captured, but he also did not want to fight with the mercenaries. He knew how powerful they were, and the performance just now had given him a whole new understanding of them. It's not up to you to decide whether or not you committed a crime. Please come back with us. Sensing the unyielding aura emanating from Nie Zhengyi, the soldier from the independent regiment didn't choose to attack directly. Instead, he wanted to use words to make Nie Zhengyi surrender. That's impossible. I'm a centurion of Baiming. I can't go back with you. Nie Zhengyi shook his head. He didn't know what they meant. However, he knew that once he was caught, he would be a captive and would lose his freedom. This was not what he wanted. Then don't blame me. Seeing that Nie Zhengyi wasn't listening to them, the soldiers of the independent regiment could only shake their heads. They didn't care that there were still some commoners around them who didn't know what was going on and directly grabbed Nie Zhengyi. At this time, the performance was coming to an end. A group of female soldiers from the publicity department were lining up on the stage to take their curtain call. The audience below the stage was enthusiastically applauding, affirming the other party's wonderful performance this time. However, it was at this time that the sound of fighting came from below the stage, attracting everyone's attention for a moment. There were nearly 70 Baiming soldiers in the crowd watching the performance. About 60 of them were locked down and subdued at the first moment. After all, the Baiming army uniforms they were wearing were too eye-catching. However, there were still 9 people who were resisting, and they all had some strength. Among them, Nie Zhengyi's fight was the fiercest and the fastest to end. Bang! A fist collided with a fist, and the soldier from the independent regiment was knocked back 2 steps. Then, a long leg kicked him in the chest, causing him to stumble back again. If it weren't for the fact that there were still many commoners standing behind him, he would have fallen to the ground. After repelling the soldiers of the independent regiment, Nie Zhengyi instinctively wanted to escape. However, he quickly shook his head helplessly because he didn't know when, but he realized that there were already 4 mercenary soldiers standing beside him. They were staring at him covetously. Suddenly, the sound of fighting came from the crowd. Waves of screams could not be stopped from coming from the Fuyun building. Even on the stage, some of the female soldiers were trembling all over. It was one thing for them to fight and kill on the show, but it was another thing for them to fight in real life. Restlessness began to appear, but it was quickly suppressed. The commoners had already noticed that many mercenary soldiers had appeared on the scene. They were all tall and sturdy, and their eyes were fierce. The appearance of these people gave everyone a sense of relief. Some people were extremely excited. When they watched the performance just now, everything was rehearsed. How could it be as exciting as a real fight between dragons and tigers? Some of the bolder ones even found a good seat and sat down, as if this was the real show they were going to watch today. On the stage, Beta Persei appeared with 10 of his guards. As soon as he appeared, the publicity director Shu Weiqing hurriedly walked over. "Brother Beta Persei, what's going on?" "It's fine, it's just a small matter." Beta Persei's face revealed a confident expression. He first nodded at Shu Weiqing, then at Kikij, who was looking at him affectionately. Then, he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Everyone, pay attention. I'm Beta Persei from the Yang residence. This place has been controlled by the mercenaries. Everyone, don't panic, and there's no need to be crowded. This matter will be over soon. Everyone, just treat it as a free show." Beta Persei's voice was already loud to begin with, and this shout from his dantian was even louder. Sure enough, with this shout, the crowd quieted down a lot. Although most people didn't know Beta Persei, he said that he was from the Yang residence. Wasn't that someone by the god of war's side? Even the god of war had sent someone, what else did they have to worry about? After Beta Persei revealed his identity, the hot-tempered commoners quickly quieted down. Then, they all looked at the fighting scene with the mentality of watching a show. In the resistance of the 9 people, 4 of them were quickly subdued. Only 5 people, including Nie Zhengyi, were still fighting with the independent regiment. Nie Zhengyi was fighting 1 against 4 and was already at a disadvantage. With his ability, the soldiers of the independent regiment wouldn't be able to gain any advantage in a one-on-one fight, but it was hard to say if it was 1 against 4. He was having a hard time holding on and felt that the world was unfair. Seeing that everyone's eyes were on him, he thought of a plan and shouted, "What's wrong? Aren't the mercenaries very powerful? Why are you playing the trick of winning with numbers? Don't you dare to have a fair one-on-one fight with me?" Logically speaking, it was unreasonable to shout like that. On the battlefield, the most important thing was to kill and defeat the enemy. Who cared how many people you had? If you had fewer people, it only proved that you were not capable enough. But this wasn't a battlefield and there were so many commoners watching. Nie Zhengyi's shout attracted a lot of discussion and actually gained the support of some people. Deputy Commander Xianxia, who was commanding the soldiers, was startled when he heard this. He didn't think that there would be such a smart person among the Baiming soldiers who knew how to take advantage of the situation. He couldn't help but look at Nie Zhengyi and think about what to say. But before Xianxia could say anything, Beta Persei, who was standing on the performance stage, had already spoken. On the battlefield, only life and death matters. No one will talk to me about fairness. But since you want a one-on-one fight, I'll fulfill your wish. Ba Daojiang, go test his ability. Be careful, don't kill him. This person has some ability and should be someone with a position. Yes, brother Beta Persei. Hearing that there was a chance to show off his skills, Ba Daojiang immediately grinned and nodded excitedly. He took the task and strode towards the fighting field. With Beta Persei's shout, the 4 independent soldiers who were attacking at the same time stopped. Their faces were all red. They felt that it was a humiliation that they couldn't take down their opponent after such a long time. But since brother Beta Persei had given the order, they had no choice but to obey. Beta Persei's shout attracted everyone's attention and they fell on Ba Daojiang, who was walking down the performance stage step by step. Ba Daojiang came from the underworld and his boxing skills were unparalleled. Later, he joined Yang Xia and became a guard by the 6th young master's side. He even had the opportunity to receive guidance from Yang Chendong. His strength was no longer the same as before. Now that he had a chance to show off in front of everyone, he would definitely grab hold of this opportunity. First, he strode forward. His target seemed to be Jianghu. However, as he was walking, he happened to encounter a Biming squad leader who was locked in a fight with an independent soldier. When he walked past, he suddenly threw a punch. Caught off guard, the Biming squad leader blocked it with his own fist. However, it was precisely this attack that sent him flying. His body landed 3 to 4 meters behind him before he could land. His face was contorted in pain and a trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that this punch had caused him serious internal injuries. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the independent soldier who was fighting with him stepped forward and subdued him. With just one punch, he had defeated a Biming squad leader who had the ability to fight for a long time. This blow first caused the audience to fall silent. Then, there was a round of applause, expressing everyone's admiration for Ba Daojiang. Ba Daojiang cupped his fists at the audience with a smile on his face. After that, he continued to move forward. Another Biming squad leader was sent flying with a punch. This forced the other 2 Biming soldiers who were still fighting to stop and let themselves be restrained. They had already seen how powerful Ba Daojiang was and knew that they were no match for him. There was no point in asking for trouble. Chapter 764. With that, Jianghu was the only one left standing on the stage. However, his expression was extremely solemn. It was obvious that he had seen through Ba Daojiang's strength. In just a short while, Ba Daojiang had already appeared in front of Jianghu. He then asked in a disdainful tone, "Kid, do you want to take a punch or surrender? Let's fight. It's rare to meet an opponent like you." Facing Ba Daojiang's strong pressure, Jianghu did not choose to retreat. Instead, he moved one of his shoulders, showing that he would not surrender and would fight to the end. All right. Ba Daojiang was still afraid that his opponent would give in. If that happened, he would not be able to enjoy the fight. Now, Jianghu's choice was exactly what he wanted. Laughing loudly, he suddenly dashed to Jianghu's side and threw a punch. Jianghu, who had been observing Ba Daojiang's movements, quickly dodged to the side when he saw the punch coming towards his right shoulder. At the same time, he kicked out with his long leg. Having seen Ba Daojiang's moves, Jianghu would not be stupid enough to take his punch head-on. Boom! The kick landed on Ba Daojiang's waist, and the two separated immediately after the contact. In the first round, Jianghu gained the upper hand with a kick. On the other hand, Ba Daojiang missed his punch and even suffered a kick. It was obvious that he had lost points. Ba Daojiang, can you do it? The sixth young master has said more than once that even a lion uses its full strength to catch a rabbit. If you are careless again, you should retreat. Beta Persei, who was on the stage, saw everything clearly. Jianghu did have some skills and his body was agile enough. However, the main reason he was kicked was because of his carelessness. Beta Persei's reprimand made Ba Daojiang's face turn red. Brother Beta Persei, give me one more chance. I will definitely take care of this kid. Ba Daojiang was determined, but at the same time, he raised his guard. He rushed forward again, his eyes fixed on Jianghu's body. At this moment, Jianghu's body tensed up. Although he seemed to have gained the upper hand in the first round, the rebounding force of his kick was not weak. He could still feel the numbness in his legs. This also proved the strength of the Eight Paths River. Right now, the other party's heart was filled with caution, staring at him, giving Jianghu the feeling of being stared at by a fierce tiger. It was as if no matter what he did next, he would not be able to avoid the other party's attention, and would not be able to succeed. Jianghu was shocked by Ba Daojiang's aura, and he didn't dare to act rashly. Ba Daojiang didn't care about that. His body moved forward, and his fists rushed forward. His hands were like two dragons emerging from the sea, and it seemed as if he was only attacking and not defending. However, Nie Zhengyi could not be fooled by this illusion. Facing the Ba Daojiang that was prepared, if he chose to attack now, he would definitely suffer. After all, their strengths were not on the same line. There was still a huge gap between them. Tong tong tong. Nie Zhengyi didn't dare to attack again. Facing the two fists that were rushing towards him, he could only defend. Then, the long fists smashed on his body. Every time they hit, he couldn't help but grimace in pain. It was really unbearable. After a dozen punches like this, when Nie Zhengyi felt that he couldn't lift his arms anymore, Ba Daojiang once again used a strong grappling hand. After pressing down on Nie Zhengyi's neck, he threw Nie Zhengyi out. Nie Zhengyi, who was already in a daze from the beating, tried his best to land on his back to reduce the pain he might suffer. Just as he landed and let out a muffled groan, another two soldiers from the independent regiment came over and held him down, completely subduing him. Take away all the troublemakers. Beta Persei, who was standing on the stage, waved his hand. Then, he nodded gently at the publicity director Shui Qing and gave Kikij a reassuring look. He then strode out of the Fuyun building surrounded by Peng Yu and the others. Not long after Beta Persei and the others left, Zhang Quan and Su Dei rushed over with dozens of Baiming soldiers. However, the answer they received was that Baiming soldiers were causing trouble here and had all been taken away. If they wanted to get them, they would have to go to the beginning city's barracks. Zhang Quan didn't dare to go to the beginning city's barracks. With just Su Dei and the dozens of people he brought, they wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between the enemy's teeth. Helpless, he thought of Yu Mian. At this moment, he could only ask for help from the city lord's mansion. Besides, the 300 Baiming soldiers were taken away in confusion. They were then taken to the mercenary barracks outside the South City. Here, they were detained separately and interrogated repeatedly. The general idea was that they left the Datong city's diplomatic mission without permission. Were they trying to pry into the secrets of the mercenaries and the city's defense, etc.? Faced with such a crime that could be beheaded, all the Baiming soldiers shook their heads like a rattle drum. They were really just curious about the show they were going to star in. That was why they had the courage to rush out of the inn. They really didn't have any other intentions. Putting aside how anxious and defensive the 300 Baiming soldiers were, Nie Zhengyi, who had been taught a lesson by Ba Daojiang, felt a little dizzy. Then, he was taken to a very quiet place with a black mask on his head. The reason why it was very quiet was because he could no longer hear any sound in his ears. After an unknown amount of time, he finally heard footsteps. Then, the black mask on his head was taken off. While feeling the dazzling sunlight in front of him, Nie Zhengyi also saw a very young man standing in front of him. The young man had a smile on his face and looked at him with interest. At the same time, he was also sizing up the person who had come. He was young, handsome, and had an indescribable temperament. It felt like he was as heavy as a mountain and as wide as the sea. Even though he was smiling, he still gave Nie Zhengyi a great deal of pressure. Who are you? When Nie Zhengyi saw that Beta Persei, who had previously commanded the troops, was standing beside the young man, and looked like a servant, his instincts told him that the young man in front of him was definitely not a simple person. Impudent! How dare you casually ask questions in front of the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty? Before the young man could answer, Beta Persei's roar had already sounded. Great Ming's Duke of Loyalty! Hearing this, Nie Zhengyi's legs went soft and he knelt on the ground with a plop. This was not to say that he did not have a backbone, but that Yang Chendong's name had already resounded throughout the Great Ming. Even in the Datong Prefecture's military camp, the soldiers often talked about this topic when they had nothing to do. In the hearts of the soldiers, this Duke of Loyalty had long been a legend and had become a synonym for strength and invincibility. You've heard of me? Seeing Nie Zhengyi kneeling in front of him, Yang Chendong's face did not change at all. Perhaps he had long been used to all of this. Yes, I've heard of the Duke of Loyalty and know that you're very good at fighting. As Jianghu answered, he was also a little excited. He could actually meet the Duke of Loyalty in person and even talk to him. This was something he had never dared to dream of before. At this moment, Jianghu was like a 7th-ranked county magistrate who had been summoned by the emperor. His heart was only filled with excitement and excitement. My level of fighting is just average. It's mainly because the soldiers under me put their lives on the line that I'm able to achieve glory time and time again. Yang Chendong said with a modest face. Jianghu did not seem to agree with this point of view. Perhaps it was because he had understood some things in the city yesterday, but he could not help but say, that's also the ability of the Duke of Loyalty. Furthermore, you love your soldiers like your children. To be able to become your subordinate is a matter of happiness and pride. How could they not put their lives on the line? These words, which seemed to be a bit of bootlicking, caused Yang Chendong to burst into laughter. Yes, I know you. You're called Jianghu, right? I didn't expect you to be so good with words. In that case, if you were given a chance, would you want to join the mercenary army? The Duke of Loyalty actually knew him and even took the initiative to recruit him. This honor immediately made Jianghu extremely excited. However, in his mind, he suddenly thought of his mother in the Datong prefecture. Although his father had died in the battle with the Walla a few years ago, and although he had not married a wife because of his pride, he still had a mother who lived in the Datong prefecture. If he joined the mercenary army now, what would his mother do? Once the Ming army and the embroidered uniform guards found out, his mother would most likely be doomed. Jianghu's expression constantly changed. Yang Chendong only sized him up and did not have any intention of urging him. After a few breaths of time, Jianghu raised his head and said very seriously, Duke, although I really envy the treatment of the mercenary army and admire your courage in defeating the enemies of the grassland, I still cannot join the mercenary army. Is it because of your mother? Yang Chendong waited for Jianghu to finish speaking before asking with a smile. You know this too? Jianghu's face revealed a surprised expression. How could he have known that not long after they left Datong Prefecture, the intelligence personnel of the Security Bureau received the news? They reported the situation to the higher-ups of the Security Bureau and informed the First City. At the same time, they also began to investigate the entourage. And Jianghu was the main target of the research, so his situation was naturally investigated very clearly. Of course I know. I also know that you were born in the military, I know that you are very filial, and I also know that you have very high standards. This year, you are 25 years old and still haven't married. This is not because you can't afford to marry, but because you haven't met the right one. How about it? After watching the performance of our female soldiers today, they all have good figures and good looks. Is there anyone you like? Chapter 765. Yang Chendong smiled faintly as he spoke. Every time he said a word, Jianghu could not help but shiver. The Duke of Loyalty was really omniscient. He even knew the situation of a small centurion like Jianghu. Didn't that mean that the background of the 1,000-man diplomatic group had long been known? Jianghu was still in shock, but when he heard Yang Chendong's next words, he was so shocked that his mouth opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. What if I told you that even if you joined the mercenary army, your mother would still be fine, and I would allow you to choose an unmarried female soldier as your wife? What would you choose? Is there such a good thing? Jianghu was indeed shocked and could not help but ask. I don't think I need to lie to you with my status. Yang Chendong did not answer directly, but this sentence was the answer. What was Yang Chendong's status? Even the Emperor of Baiming and the Emperor of Southern Ming were very afraid of him. Even the King of the Grassland, Yes Hen, would be frightened when he heard his name. How could such a person casually joke with a small centurion like Jianghu? As soon as he asked this question, Jianghu knew that he was overthinking. Since there was such a good thing, there was no reason for him to refuse. He immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to Yang Chendong and said, "Your subordinate, Jianghu, is willing to join the mercenary group and serve the Duke for life." Good. Jianghu finally made his choice. Yang Chendong was overjoyed and walked forward to help him up. Then, he looked at him and said, "Not bad. Looking at your pure eyes, you must be a man of your words. Since that's the case, I will accept you." Jianghu was convinced by Yang Chendong, but he didn't stay in the beginning city. Instead, he was released along with the 300 Baiming soldiers and returned to the inn. In other words, Jianghu was loyal to Yang Chendong, but the nature of his work was different. He had become a chess piece buried in the Datong prefecture. Normally, he would pass on important military information, but at critical times, he could play a decisive role. Yang Chendong treated Jianghu quite well. He directly proposed that after returning to the Datong prefecture, there would be a specialized person in charge of his affairs. There would also be a specialized person who would contact him. This way, they could do their best to prevent his identity from being exposed and putting him in danger. At the same time, he also prepared a lot of money for Jianghu. Yang Chendong only had one request, and that was to bribe his superiors as soon as possible, and then continue to be promoted. The position of a mere centurion was still too light. What Yang Chendong wanted was a general who held real power and could come into contact with more secrets. Jianghu also guaranteed this. He did not doubt his own ability, he was still so young, and was already a centurion. This was enough to explain everything. If he had gold and silver to clear the way, he was very confident that he would be able to charge up in a short period of time and obtain a higher position. Zhang Quan went to the city lord's mansion, and not long after, Yuan personally went to the barracks to communicate. He took back the 300 captured Baiming soldiers. What Zhang Quan and Su Dei did not expect was that none of the 300 Baiming soldiers returned with injuries. In other words, they were only interrogated when they went to the mercenary barracks, and were not interrogated. On this point, Su Dei was very emotional. He felt that the mercenaries were indeed an army that followed the rules, and only this kind of army would be able to fight against the Mongol cavalry and win every battle. Humph! They are just ordinary soldiers, how could they be valued by the mercenaries? Zhang Quan had a different opinion. He felt that it was because the captured soldiers were too low level that they did not attract the interest of the mercenaries. This was the end of the farce. According to Jianghu's previous thoughts, neither Zhang Quan nor Su Dei punished the 300 soldiers, and only gave them a warning. It was very reasonable that the law could not punish the masses. After the farce, Zhang Quan and Su Dei went to the city lord's mansion again. They had wasted another day for nothing, and the negotiations still had to continue. In the Yang mansion, Yang Chendong was deep in thought with his eyes closed. Beta Persei stood at the side, not daring to say a word. Only when there was movement outside the door and Tiger's Mane's figure appeared did Beta Persei leave the house with light steps. What's going on? What happened? Tiger's Mane heard from the guards that the 6th young master did not even have dinner after returning from a trip. He hurriedly rushed over from the barracks. At this moment, he was naturally asking Beta Persei, who had been staying by the 6th young master's side. This is hard to say. Beta Persei shook his head, not knowing how to answer. What do you mean by hard to say? Just say what you have to say. Tiger's Mane glared at Beta Persei, as if he was questioning him. Tiger's Mane's loyalty to Yang Chendong was naturally unquestionable. If there was only one person in the army who did not betray Yang Chendong, it must be Tiger's Mane. Because of this, Beta Persei also trusted him very much. He immediately told him about how the 6th young master left the mansion and privately went to the barracks to meet Jianghu. Tiger's Mane, as soon as the young master appeared, Jianghu was subdued, but at the same time, he also said some things about the Datong mansion. According to him, the upper echelons of Baiming have been saying bad things about the young master in the army. They have always said that the young master is a traitor and have been on guard against him. And I heard that many soldiers in the Baiming army believe this. Beta Persei's answer finally made Tiger's Mane understand what had happened. Before, he didn't know, so he wasn't worried. But now that he knew, he smiled and said, I thought it was something big. Don't worry, young master is very broad-minded. He definitely won't worry about such a small matter. Yes, the young master will not worry about such a small matter, but not long ago, the Security Bureau sent a report about the Baiming Imperial Court. I heard that many people there have put forward a proposal, saying that they want to order the Yuan Sea to cut off our supply route from the sea. What, they really dare? Hearing this, even Tiger's Mane's expression changed, and then he glared at Beta Persei. Why don't you say it all at once? You have to say it one by one, humph. After saying this, Tiger's Mane strode into the house. As soon as he entered the room, he came in front of Yang Chendong and said, Young master, don't worry, I'll immediately take the independent regiment to the Yuan Sea. Didn't they want to cut off our supply route? Then we'll flatten them first. Yang Chendong, who had been sitting on the chair with his eyes closed, opened his eyes at this moment. The independent regiment has such a strong combat power that they can destroy the entire Baiming army in the Yuan Sea with their strength alone? They can also control every city and ensure the safety of our supply route? We can't do it. Even though Tiger's Mane was so confident, he could not help but say with a bitter face at this moment. The intelligence of the Security Bureau had long recorded that there were many Baiming guards in the Yuan Sea area. Their military strength was about hundreds of thousands of people, and they were very widely distributed. The furthest two guards were thousands of miles apart. With such a large territory, how could an independent regiment occupy it so easily? Not to mention the independent regiment, even if the army in the beginning city was sent over now, they might be able to defeat the Baiming guards, but it was impossible to occupy that place and maintain the stability there. That place was too big, and there were too many guards. Unless they had enough military strength, they would not be able to control it. Not to mention, Yang Chendong was not ready to fall out with Baiming. According to him, whether it was Baiming or Southern Ming, they were all made up of Han people. In the future, if he wanted to lead the Han people to the top of the world, a strong population base was essential. Unless it was necessary, he did not want to make things difficult for the Han people, and he did not want to be enemies with the Han army. Otherwise, this was equivalent to digging his own foundation. In a situation where he did not want to fight, if the Baiming Imperial Court really ordered to block the supply route, Yang Chendong would really suffer. After all, the ability of the beginning city to self-produce was too low. If there was no continuous supply of resources from Qiqian City, not to mention developing on the grassland, even surviving would be a problem. Tiger's Mane did not speak, and Yang Chendong once again fell into silence. He now needed to think of a way to stop the Baiming Imperial Court from giving orders to the Yuan Sea area. As for how to do this, it was truly a difficult matter. The negotiation was still going on in the city lord's mansion, and it was getting smoother. Perhaps it was because Zhang Quan's attitude was very firm, but in the end, Yu Mian still took a step back. He did not have the intention to ask the other party for military pay. Of course, Zhang Quan also did not mention that the beginning city would be under the management of the Baiming Imperial Court. In the end, the two sides reached an agreement, and that was to issue a joint statement to the outside world that the Datong Prefecture and the beginning city were allies. If one side was in trouble, the other side would unconditionally send troops to support. The agreement was finally reached. Presumably, after knowing this news, Yes Hen had to consider more things when he wanted to take action. This made Zhang Quan seem to be very satisfied. After completing his mission, he rejected Yumian's suggestion to stay in the first city for a few more days and left the city with the 1,000 guards he had brought with him. After Yumian sent Zhang Quan off, he strode to the Yang mansion to meet Yang Chendong. In the hall of the Yang mansion, Yang Chendong looked at the joint statement made by the two sides and smiled. "It's just a piece of waste paper." Yang Chendong said this for a reason. The statement only said that the two sides were allies. If one side was in trouble, the other side would provide support. However, it did not specify how many reinforcements would be sent. In other words, if one side was really in trouble, the other side could send 10,000 people, 1,000 people, or even 100 people. With such a big loophole in front of him, Yang Chendong did not believe that Yumian and Zhang Quan would not be able to see it. However, both sides did not point it out. This already meant a lot. Chapter 766. Ignoring such a big loophole and pretending not to see it, this already showed that both sides were just putting on a show. They just wanted to use the tiger's skin to scare the other side. However, Yang Chendong could also understand that information was so undeveloped. Even if one side was attacked, by the time the news reached the other side's ears, it would be too late. What was the point of sending reinforcements? Yumian naturally understood this logic. He also understood that Zhang Quan only wanted righteousness. He wanted to use the first city to deter some of the Mongolian troops who wanted to attack the Datong prefecture. As for sending reinforcements, it was better to forget about it. In the past few days, he had heard more than once that the mercenaries' food was so good that it was not much worse than that of a eunuch like him. Just the food alone was something that the Datong prefecture could not afford. In any case, the negotiation finally came to an end. Yumian could be considered to have completed a political task. While he relaxed, he also focused his attention on another matter. He looked at Yang Chendong and asked, "Sixth young master, have you really made up your mind to take over Tulu city?" "Yes, I have to take over that place. Previously, I sent people from the security bureau to investigate the situation there. The information has been reported back. There are only 10,000 Tatar troops that belong to Tuachu Obuhua. 5,000 of them are infantry. In front of the mercenaries, it is not worth mentioning." Yang Chendong admitted with a smile. Since he could say this, it was obvious that he had made up his mind. Although Yumian was the governor, his power was much lower than Yang Chendong's. There were some things that he only had the right to suggest but not the right to make decisions. Now that he heard that Yang Chendong seemed to have made up his mind, he carefully said, "Sixth young master, Tulu city is a barrier to the northwest of Baiming. It is also a buffer zone between us. Once we break through there, there will be no obstacles between us. We can see swords and spears at any time." "Yes. What I want is to see swords and spears at any time. Let me tell you this. I have received news that the Baiming Imperial Court is considering giving an order to New Urgan-du-Si to cut off our logistical supply route. If this is the case, what about the army's provisions? What about the security of the first city? They forced me to do this." Yang Chendong said this with a helpless look. After he finished speaking, he said something that shocked Yumian. "This time, not only do I want to break through Tulu city, but I also want to personally go to Baiming's capital. There are some people that I want to meet." "Ah. No. Yumian was really frightened this time. He said with a panicked expression, "Sixth young master, a gentleman does not stand under a dangerous wall. If the Baiming Imperial Court really wants to deal with you, if something happens in their territory, the entire Yangxia Empire will be in chaos." Seeing that Yumian was so anxious, Yang Chendong was very gratified. At least this meant that the other party was really looking out for him. He said confidently, "Don't worry. As long as we occupy Tulu city, it is equivalent to opening the door to the northwest of Baiming's capital. Unless the other party has made the decision to fight to the death with the mercenaries, they will not dare to touch me casually. Besides, I've already given orders to the Security Bureau and Crimson City. Some elite Cold Vanguard soldiers will enter the capital as soon as possible. A regiment of elite Cold Vanguard soldiers should be enough to intimidate the enemy. Yang Qindong waved his hand nonchalantly. To others, entering Baiming's capital at this time might be extremely dangerous. However, to Datsang, Yang Qindong was really nothing. Unless the other party could kill him in an instant, as long as he was given a little time to react, no one would be able to kill him. Yang Qindong was so confident that he made a decision. Yu Mian knew that there was nothing he could say. The only thing he could do was to take care of the city during the time when the sixth young master was not in the first city. Let this city develop quickly and not let people worry about it would be a great merit. And just 3 days after Yu Mian and Yang Qindong met, there was a big movement in the first city's military camp. The 3 divisions of the Cold Front and the fully replenished Jurchen cavalry regiment finally set off. This time, they would leave the first city and go all the way north, straight to the Siberia area controlled by the Golden Horde. They would fight the so-called Golden Family head-on. And for this expedition, Yang Qindong had provided 200 carriages of military supplies. In the Yang residence, in front of Yang Qindong stood the commander of the 3 divisions, Wu Sheng, the political commissar Chen Bo, the 3rd Regiment Changyang, and the commander of the Jurchen cavalry regiment, Yila. Yang Qindong looked at Wu Sheng and the other 3 and asked in a deep voice, "This expedition is of great significance. I believe that all the grassland tribes will pay attention to you. My request is also very simple. You have to show the power of the mercenaries. You have to beat the enemy until they can't eat or sleep when they hear your name. Do you have the confidence to complete this mission?" "Yes." Naturally, Wu Sheng and the other 3 replied in unison. "Good, I also have confidence in you. But I still want to tell you that along the way to the north, you can attack while occupying some important military positions. If necessary, you are allowed to expand your troops. I ask you to fight steadily. 200 carriages of logistic supplies won't last long for the army. You must have a safe supply route behind you. This is also the foundation of your survival. Do you understand?" Yang Qindong knew that war was about money and logistics. In modern warfare, a cannonball could cost tens of millions of dollars or even more. Even a gun could cost $1 or more. This was also why countries often negotiated with each other when they encountered problems. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they would not easily use force. But at this time, although the army did not have heavy firearms to consume, the soldiers still needed money to eat, drink, and defecate. Without sufficient rations as a foundation, it was easy for the morale of the army to become unstable and problems would arise. Fight steadily and step by step. This is what we ask of you. I will also be here waiting for the battle report of your victory." At the end of the meeting, after Yang Qindong said these words, the 3 divisions and the Nuzhan cavalry regiment, a total of about 10,000 people, left the first city and headed north. At this time, it was still snowing heavily outside. Logically speaking, such weather was not suitable for mobilizing troops. Even the escorting of food supplies had brought great difficulties. However, Yang Qindong did not want to wait any longer. A person's life was limited. If he wanted to achieve his life goal, he had to seize every minute. As for the heavy snow, he would have to experience it eventually. Instead of slowly adapting to it in the future, it was better to start now. "Young master, it's snowing heavily everywhere. Some places don't even have roads. It's really troublesome for the army to move." Tiger's Mane stood beside Yang Qindong on the tower of the first city. He looked at the back of the army that was gradually disappearing and said with some emotion, "Yes, it's a little troublesome. However, a truly strong army will not stop because of the bad weather. We mercenaries want to create miracles and make everything impossible possible. Yang Chendong first nodded in agreement, then said in a very heroic tone. After saying this, he looked at the surrounding generals. Let's go. Since everyone is here, let's have a meeting to discuss the matter of attacking Talos City. Talos City was also known as Talos City. It was west of the bordered white banner of Inner Mongolia. Ming Jin Yuzi's record of the Northern Expedition, Yongle 8th year, 1410, Zhu Di's Northern Expedition. Jin River moraine is more than 10 miles away. There is an ancient city near the road. The instructions said, "This is Talos City. I have hunted here." The southeast area of Talos City would be the future Jianghu. That place was already in Hebei. From there, it would be much closer to the capital of Beiming. In other words, once they occupied this place, it was equivalent to setting up a Damocles sword in the northwest of Beiming. It could fall at any time and act as a deterrent. The meeting was held in the newly built war room in the city lord's manor. In front of a huge sand table, Yang Chendong divided the work among his subordinates. City Lord Yu Mian, you will remain in the city for this battle. You will be in charge of the law and order of the city. There is also the matter of the army's rations. It won't be long before the new batch of resources from Crimson City arrives. You will also need to register them. Commander Su He, this time, your Tatar cavalry will be the vanguard. I know that Amu Gulang, who is guarding Talos City, is your old friend. If possible, it would be best if you could take down the city without fighting. On the other hand, if the other side is stubborn, then don't blame us for taking action. At that time, blood will flow like rivers. You must be prepared for this. Tiger's Mane, you will lead your independent regiment and follow closely behind Commander Su He. Once the battle starts, you can provide support at any time. Oh right, you can choose 2 100mm cannons from the warehouse in the city to be used when sieging the city. Commander Lujua, you will lead the 2nd Cavalry Regiment at the back. They will be in charge of transporting the rations. At the same time, the 3 newly built regiments will be under your command. However, this time, they are not going to fight, but to build roads. In the warehouse, City Lord Yu Mian has already prepared shovels, brooms, and other items for you. He wants you to clear a slightly flat road to Talos City. The 3 new regiments are mainly responsible for protecting the safety of our rear flank. Be careful of the attacks of the Tatar cavalry on the nearby Saihan mountain. After saying this, Yang Chendong seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Yu Mian and said, when the next batch of supplies arrives, the corresponding cement factory equipment and staff will also be in place. We can't rely on Crimson City for everything, especially cement. It's too heavy and troublesome to transport. If First City wants to develop, we still need some factories. This cement factory is in the first batch of construction. We need to build it earlier. Once we can make our own cement, many roads will need to be rebuilt in the future. You have to worry about this matter. Chapter 767. Yes, 6th young master, I will remember it. Yu Mian nodded heavily. Finally, Yang Chendong's gaze fell on Zhui Feng, the leader of the 1st Cavalry Regiment. You don't have to participate in this battle. You are mainly responsible for the safety of the origin city. If there are any small people who want to make a move, it will depend on your performance. In addition, your regiment is also responsible for receiving supplies. If there is a need, there are still 7,000 captives in the logistics regiment. Although they are usually coolies, some of them used to be cavalry and can play a role on the battlefield. If there is any danger, they can be used. Is there any problem? Reporting to the 6th young master, there is no problem. But the next time there is a battle, can you not let our regiment stay at home? Zhui Feng's face had a hint of pleading. The army was mobilized and only their regiment was left. This made it very difficult for him to explain to his brothers and officers. Okay, I will agree to your request. Yang Chendong's face was full of smiles. He liked this kind of fighting spirit army. If once a battle broke out, everyone wanted to retreat and hoped that others would go to war, then this army would not be far from defeat. Speaking of attacking Tulu City, it was not a matter of 1 or 2 days of preparation. Basically, the regimental leaders knew about this news half a month ago. According to Yang Chendong, it was already the end of November. He was still preparing to celebrate the new year in the capital of Baiming, so this matter could not be delayed. Although the new year of 1453 was at the beginning of February, it was still very tense with only 2 months. Once the battle meeting started, the regimental leaders went back to make preparations. And the most excited were the 3 new regiments that had just joined the mercenary army. A regiment had 5 battalions, and a battalion had 4 companies and 400 people. A total of 6,000 soldiers of the new regiment had only trained for less than 2 months. Suddenly, a great battle was about to break out. The soldiers who wanted to contribute were all very excited. At noon, the regiment gave the order to set off early tomorrow morning. Every soldier had half a day off and could go back to accompany their families. Ba Tu left the barracks excitedly and returned to his home in the beginning city. As soon as he entered the house, he saw his mother Badama and sister Kikij waiting for him. In addition, Beta Persei, who would soon become his brother-in-law, was also there. Ba Tu, are you afraid? As soon as she saw her brother come back, Kikij hurriedly greeted him. The relationship between the brother and sister had always been very good. From this point of view, it was already confirmed. Although Mother Badama didn't say anything, her loving and caring gaze had already proved everything. Mother, sister, Yuan, second brother, I'm not afraid. When it came to Beta Persei, Ba Tu really wanted to call him brother-in-law, but he knew that this relationship had not been made public yet, and only a limited number of people knew about it. Besides, he didn't want his comrades to think that he had entered the army through nepotism, so it was easier for him to address Beta Persei as brother. How is it? I told you that Ba Tu wouldn't be afraid. Beta Persei, who had been waiting for the news, suddenly laughed out loud. This laughter caused Kikij to be a little dissatisfied. She glared at Beta Persei coquettishly. Do you think everyone is like you, only excited when talking about war? This is the first time our Ba Tu is going to the battlefield. Sigh, it's okay if it's the first time. There's always a first time for everything. Besides, the new regiment is only responsible for repairing the road at the back. There won't be any danger. This time, the 6th young master wants them to feel the atmosphere of war. Beta Persei waved his hand indifferently. He really didn't think that the new regiment was going to war, so naturally, there was nothing to worry about. At this time, Badama finally spoke. Beta Persei is right. Ba Tu is going to feel the atmosphere of the battlefield this time. They haven't been training for long. I'm afraid that even if they want to go to the front line, the god of war won't agree. Sigh, that's right. Beta Persei chuckled. In exchange, Kikij rolled her eyes. Similar things happened in other families as well. Basically, the family members were a little worried, but these new recruits were all excited. It was as if they were really going to the battlefield and killing the enemy. Early the next morning, the army that had been preparing for more than 10 days set off. The first to attack was the 3,000-strong Tatar cavalry regiment. Commander Su He rode a tall horse and entered the city from the south gate. Then, he passed through the streets and led the army out of the west gate under the cheers of the people. They went straight in the direction of Tulu City. After Su He's Tatar cavalry regiment, the mercenaries walked on the streets one after another, and then went out of the city to the battlefield. This was specially requested by Yang Chendong. He wanted all the soldiers to experience such a welcome ceremony and let the people in the city feel the strength of the mercenaries. In this way, if there is a shortage of soldiers in the future, more young men will sign up to join the army. Tulu City. Originally a territory controlled by the Tatars, the general Amu Gulang, who was guarding here, also belonged to the Tatars. He was a general under Tuachuo Buhua. When translated into Chinese, Amu Gulang meant peace. In fact, as his name suggested, he had been very safe. Even when Yeshen joined forces with Agador to attack Tuachuo Buhua not long ago, he was very safe in Tulu City. So much so that even after such a long time had passed, no one had come to cause trouble for him. All of this naturally could not be attributed to a name, but because of Tulu City's special geographical location. From here to the southeast was Baiming's territory, and it would not be too far before reaching the capital of Baiming. It could be said that this was a dividing line, completely separating Baiming from the Mongol tribes. In such an environment, it was like being roasted on a fire, and they could be attacked by the Baiming army at any time. Because of this, it was the safest place. Even Agadorji didn't have any ideas about it. Baiming was fully developing their military and opened up their commerce. It was said that they also wanted to open up a navy and build a defense line. Before they were fully prepared, they would definitely not recklessly start a war with the Mongol tribes of the Central Plains. Not to mention, the Hetao region not far from Datong was already occupied by Yeshen's Warawara. Baiming was afraid that someone would attack them from Tulu City. Who would be so blind to find trouble with them? In such an environment, Amu Gulang was very comfortable and in a good mood. When the heavy snow danced in the sky, his hanging heart was even more relieved. In such weather, no army would be willing to move. This was also the safest time of the year. However, during this period, which was regarded as the safest, there was suddenly news that the beginning city's army was moving in the direction of Tulu City. They had already passed by Saihan Mountain, and the front army was only 100 miles away. As soon as the news came out, Amu Gulang, who was resting in his residence, was shocked. He quickly called his deputy general Shibei to discuss how to deal with it. Amu Gulang was not tall and could only be said to have an ordinary figure. In comparison, Deputy General Shibei was burly and looked like a fierce general. When the two of them met and listened to the report from the scouts in the room, their expressions became grave and deep at the same time. Amu Gulang's brows were tightly knitted together. What was going on in the beginning city? The reports from the scouts had already made it very clear. For this reason, he had even sent scouts into the city to investigate. Facing the beginning city, which had opened 4 gates and looked like it was not defended at all, they did not seem to be worried about any scouts coming to inquire about the news. Therefore, the scouts went and returned quickly. A series of titles such as the Duke of Loyalty, the God of War, the Messenger of Tingri, and a series of things that had happened recently poured into Amu Gulang's ears. It was precisely because he understood more that he felt more afraid of the beginning city. Even Agar Dorji's 50,000 cavalrymen were wiped out. With the 5,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 infantrymen in the city, could they really defend the city and block the attack of the God of War's army? Amu Gulang's heart was not confident. After hesitating for a moment, he asked tentatively, General Shibei, what do you think? We can't defend it. After hesitating for a while, Shibei gave his answer. Yes, we can't defend it, but we can only defend it. I have received Great Khan Tuachuo's kindness. At this time, there's no reason for me to give up the city. If they have the ability, they can just kill me. Amu Gulang gritted his teeth and made his final decision. Seeing that the commander was determined to die, Shibei hurriedly comforted him, General, a real man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. I believe that even if the Great Khan knows, he won't blame you. It's not the same. Let's not talk about whether the Great Khan will blame me or not. If I surrender, my conscience will be uneasy for the rest of my life. A person living in this world has to hold on to something. Alright, there's no need to say any more. I've made up my mind. I will lead 5,000 cavalrymen to fight to the death with the enemy. If I unfortunately die in battle, Shibei, you and 5,000 infantrymen don't think about holding on. You can choose to surrender. This is my order. Amu Gulong's moral character was still very good. He didn't have to force his subordinates to do anything. On the contrary, he gave them a way to live. This also made Shibei very excited. General, don't worry. If you really die in battle, I will definitely collect your bones and bury you, so that you can return to the foot of Tingri. Thank you very much. Amu Gulong cupped his fist and said. 2 days later, under the city of Tulu, the vanguard of the mercenaries, the Tatar group, arrived. According to the order of Yang Chendong, He called for a fight at the foot of the city, saying that he wanted to see Amu Gulong to talk about the old days. Both of them were generals under the Tatar forces. Naturally, they knew each other before, but their relationship wasn't very deep. This time, when the two sides met, at the beginning, Amu Gulong said to He with a look of contempt, "So it's General Su. Huh, I didn't expect you to still be alive. What's wrong? When your master Agadorji escaped, didn't he order you to cover the retreat? Did you defeat the mercenaries?" Chapter 768. He knew that He had already surrendered to the mercenaries, yet he still dared to say such words. It was obvious that he was looking down on He. But how could He be so easy to deal with? He didn't care about the other party's mockery and said with a calm expression, "I am already a commander of the mercenaries. As for Agar Dorji, I have a clear conscience. I have already repaid him by exchanging my life for his son's." This was also the truth. He had indeed made this request and Yang Chendong had also satisfied him. Otherwise, he would rather die in battle than surrender. Facing He's answer, Amu Gulong didn't comment. He seemed to know that there was no point in discussing this topic at this time. Alright, let's cut the crap. It's impossible to give up Talis City. Since the Great Khan has arranged for me to guard this place, unless I die, no one can occupy this place. Bring it on if you have the ability. After saying that, Amu Gulong waved the long sword in his hand, looking like he was about to block an army of 10,000. Facing Amu Gulong's desperate look, He shook her head, reined the horse and turned back. Suddenly, she led the 3,000 cavalrymen of the Tatar cavalry regiment back, leaving the 5,000 cavalrymen of the other side who had already set up the battle formation there. The mercenaries retreated just like that, leaving Amu Gulong puzzled. But the other party had already retreated, and it was a very orderly retreat. At this time, even if he rushed forward, he wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. So, he could only lead the 5,000 Tatar cavalry back to the city. Congratulations, General. Seeing Amu Gulong leading the army back to the city in one piece, the deputy general led his men to welcome him. He spoke with a happy face as soon as he saw Amu Gulong. Sigh. On the other hand, Amu Gulong didn't seem very happy. He just shook his head and said, "They won't give up on this place. There will be a big battle in the end. This time, they came just to test my thoughts. Next time, we will meet with weapons." Amu Gulong's guess was right. The reason why He retreated without even fighting was because he considered that the sixth young master had given him the first task of persuading the other party. Since it was obvious that he couldn't persuade them, he naturally had to send the news back first and then prepare for battle. Yang Chendong was in the rear of the army, following Tiger's Man and the independent regiment to Talis City. When the scouts at the front rushed back and reported that the generals of both sides had met but parted on bad terms, Tiger's Man immediately shouted, "Then let's fight." Do they really think that they are the best in the world just because they are guarding a broken city? If they provoke this daddy, I will blast their city gate with one shot. Let's see what they can be proud of. After obtaining the 100mm mortar, Tiger's Man's courage increased. A small Talos city with only 10,000 soldiers was really not in his eyes. Of course, shouting was one thing. Tiger's man knew very well that in the end, it was still up to the sixth young master to make the decision. Therefore, after venting the emotions in his heart with a loud roar, he still looked at Yang Chendong with an expression of waiting for orders. Go, do as you think. Yang Chendong nodded lightly. Although he was not a murderous person, he had never been lenient towards his opponents. If you are not convinced, then I will beat you until you are. If you are still not convinced, then I will send you on your way. After receiving the order, Tiger's man immediately stood at attention. Young master, don't worry. Leave this battle to me. I will definitely not let you down. Ha ha ha. Tiger's man had been by Yang Chendong's side since he was young. He had witnessed every scene of the young master growing from a weak scholar to a god of war. Although he did not understand why the young master changed his temperament and suddenly became so powerful and unfathomable, he still liked the current young master very much. Yang Chendong created the Yangxie regiment, which was why Tiger's man had the power and influence. He knew that all of this was given to him by the young master, so he was absolutely loyal to Yang Chendong. He was the kind of existence that could block a bullet and die for him at any time. The sixth young master had the most important position in his heart. Next, it would depend on his performance in the army. Although the independent regiment was in the limelight recently, there were not many opportunities to perform. Now that the opportunity had come, how could he give it up? After receiving the order, he put on a white cloak and walked out of the temporary military tent. He called the deputy commander Xian Honghai and said, "Leave 2 battalions to protect the 6th young master's safety. The rest of you, follow me and speed up. Let's try to reach Tulu city by nightfall today." It was only a distance of 30 miles from where they were to the city. If it was summer, it would take less than 2 hours and a rapid march would be enough. But now, there was snow everywhere, and most of the roads under their feet had just been cleared. Marching in such an environment, it was naturally impossible to go fast even if they wanted to. After receiving the order, the independent regiment sped up their march, leaving 2 battalions behind to protect Yang Chendong's safety. The other 14 battalions were all rushing forward. When they saw the troops flashing past them one after another, leaving behind a trail of shadows that disappeared in front of them, Beta Persei, who was standing beside Yang Chendong, asked with some confusion, "Young master, don't we have to go with them?" "There's no need for that. Just let them do whatever they want. No matter how strong a person is, he can't rule the world. What we need to do is to wait for the good news from the front." Yang Chendong smiled with a very relieved look. This time, the number of mercenaries was not less than the other side, and they were accompanied by heavy weapons. If they still couldn't conquer the small Tulu city, it could only prove that Tiger's man and Su He were not suitable to lead troops and could retire from active service immediately. Yang Chendong believed in Tiger's man and Su He, and the two of them also believed in the soldiers under them. Speaking of which, during this period of time, they had not been idle in the beginning city. They only rested for 1 day every 7 days to tidy up their internal affairs and wash up. The other 6 days were spent crawling until midnight to train. Often, when the soldiers were sleeping soundly, an emergency assembly whistle would wake everyone up from their warm beds and run to the field to start training. At first, everyone did not understand this kind of training. They thought that if they did not have a good night's sleep, how could they have the energy to train? However, when every meal was filled with delicious fish and meat, they had nothing to worry about. Their nutrition could keep up, and they realized that this kind of training was not unbearable. On the contrary, everyone put in all their effort. With the idea of sweating more during training and bleeding less during battle, their strength increased day by day. When the individual strength of each soldier took a big step forward, the combat effectiveness of the entire army was a little terrifying. As the saying goes, soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. Now, it was finally time to perform well. It was finally time to fight for military merits. No one was willing to fall behind. Everyone wanted to have a better performance and fight for more advantages and benefits for their future. Yang Chendong had always been willing to spend money. In the army, there were already rules that stated how many military merits could be obtained by killing a person. Under such stimulation, everyone only hated that there was no war to fight. How could they be afraid of war? After the military order was given, the horn of war was blown. The 14 battalions of the independent regiment rushed forward, giving people the feeling that they were afraid that if they were a step slower, they would not be able to make it in time for the great battle ahead and miss out on countless military merits. Under such an excited mood, supported by such strong confidence, more than 5,000 soldiers galloped forward on horseback. Once the snow was too heavy and their path was blocked, they would dismount and walk. In short, they had to reach the designated location as soon as possible and prepare for tomorrow's battle. Under Tulu city, it slowly became lively. The number of military tents under the city also began to increase one by one. Battalions of the independent regiment arrived and set up their tents. They lined up horizontally and vertically in an extremely orderly manner. There were also some people who began to cook. Smoke rose in spirals. Everything was so orderly that Amu Gulang, who was standing on the city gate tower, shook his head. The enemy is not panicking at all. Looks like we have to give up on the idea of taking advantage of the fact that they haven't stabilized their footing yet. That's right. Look at how their tents are arranged neatly like a line. One can imagine the battle prowess of such an army. She said from the side, her eyes filled with envy. Even a general would want to lead a strong army. And the mercenaries in front of them were clearly a strong army. Right, how is the morale of the army? After giving up on the idea of sneak attacking the enemy, Amu Gulang felt much more relaxed. As for the time being, he would be safe from now until tomorrow morning. He could temporarily relax. When the issue of morale was brought up, Shibei's expression became somewhat unsightly. Not too good. When the soldiers heard that they were mercenaries from the war god's army, many of them were very afraid. Fortunately, we have always treated our brothers well. Until now, there have been no signs of desertion. But if the enemy besieges the city, it will be hard to say as time goes on. Shibei was also an extremely capable general. It was just that as the deputy general of the city, he rarely had the opportunity to display his abilities. But he usually treated his brothers very well. It was precisely because of this that when a great battle came, his subordinates were still very obedient. Even when facing the legendary war god's army, there was no one who fled without a fight. It could be said that his prestige played a significant role in all of this. But prestige might be useful in the short term. Once the battle dragged on and the enemy besieged the city, the psychological pressure would become greater and greater. It was hard to say what would happen in the end. They won't besiege the city. If I'm not wrong, I'm afraid they will choose to attack the city tomorrow. Amu Gulang understood. With such heavy snow, if they didn't have a city to rely on and just camped in the wilderness like this for a long time, no one could guarantee that there wouldn't be any problems. Since the war god was so good at fighting, there was no way he wouldn't understand this. Chapter 769. Shibei did not say anything else. He was now a fish on the chopping block. The choice had already changed. All he could do was to fight with all his might when the enemy attacked the city. As for the rest, life and death were up to fate. In Tulu city, they did not choose to launch a sneak attack. This made Tiger's Mane, who was ready to give the enemy a heavy slap in the face, a little disappointed. Looking at the firearmed soldiers lying in ambush beside the tents, he waved his hand and said, "All right, the enemy will not come out. Everyone, go into the tents to keep warm. Come, inform the 6th young master that we have safely arrived at the city and are ready to attack tomorrow morning." Under Tulu city, swords were drawn and bows were bent. It looked like a war would break out at any time. It was dark. At the rear of the army, Lu Zhua's 2nd Cavalry Regiment was also rushing to clear the road. According to Yang Qindong's intention, they wanted to open up a wide road from the first city to Tulu city. This would be beneficial for the communication between the two sides. At critical times, it would also be beneficial for the mutual support of the army. At this time, the road that the army was clearing had already reached the area controlled by Saihan Mountain. The intelligence from the reconnaissance camp had already shown that there was a Tatar army of tens of thousands of people here. Previously, they were the ones who pulled water from Alahomiki city, which was not the first city yet. Because of this, they were tricked by the mercenaries. But for some reason, since the establishment of the first city, they had not made any military movements. They seemed to be very tolerant. A dog that bites does not bark. This was an old saying among the people. When completing this mission, Yang Qindong had told Lu Zhua that they must not be careless and give the enemy a chance to attack them. Therefore, when they arrived at this area, the 2nd Cavalry Regiment's vigilance was raised a lot. The original sentries were also spread out for 2 miles to ensure that no matter if the enemy approached, they would be able to detect them early and make timely preparations. Inform the 3 new regiments that it is getting dark. Prepare to set up military tents. Inform the cooks in each battalion to prepare for dinner. Lu Zhua rode on his warhorse and looked at the 6,000 new recruits who were waving their shovels and brooms as he gave the order. The performance of these 6,000 recruits was pretty good. At least they didn't seem to be slacking off. Speaking of which, to be able to join the army at this time, which one of them wasn't working hard? After all, there were still 7,000 captives from the battle with Agador. In terms of combat power, they were much stronger than the new recruits. If it wasn't for the issue of loyalty, where would the 6,000 new recruits come from? They were worried that once the 7,000 captives were released, they would become a mainstream force and disrupt the current management model of the mercenaries. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that each of these 6,000 people was very precious. They had made countless comparisons before they got what they wanted. Such a rare opportunity, of course, everyone wanted to grasp it well. This was also their first mission. Although they appeared as coolies, every new recruit still worked hard to perform, hoping to leave a good impression on their superiors. The sky was getting dark, and some work couldn't be done. Lu Zhua gave the order for the new regiments to rest, but as the commander, he couldn't rest. He called his 3 battalion commanders. Ma Xiong-shan, Ding-shan, Temu, the 4 of us will have to work hard tonight. We will take turns to be on night duty. Is there a problem with each of us working for 4 hours? No problem. The 3 battalion commanders immediately patted their chests and promised. Inside the tent, a stove had already been lit. The warmth of spring here and the freezing cold outside formed an extremely obvious contrast and difference. At this time, Yang Qindong was sitting beside the stove, looking at the telegram sent from Qiqian City. Ever since the incident with Yang Taizhu and Chen Shuquan, Qiqian City had used this opportunity to conduct a large-scale investigation. The future 6th Madam, Wuan Xiaoyu, was in charge. Security Bureau Chief Yang San, Inspector Bureau Chief Shen Yu, Political Department Member Mo Cheng Yu, and Navy 1st Division Commander Gao Xiong formed a team of 5 to cooperate. Handing such an important task to Wuan Xiaoyu, it was impossible to say that Yang Qindong wasn't worried at all. After all, she was just a girl, and she was only 16 years old. A girl, and so young, could she bear such a heavy burden? But Yang Qindong still made this decision, and this was because of Wuan Xiaoyu's special identity. First, she was the future 6th Madam. This meant that Wuan Xiaoyu didn't have to worry too much about doing things. Even if someone wanted to deal with her, they had to consider the consequences of angering Yang Qindong. Second, as a native of Qiqian City, her parents were both factory executives. This allowed Wuan Xiaoyu to have a deeper understanding of many things in Qiqian City. This was something that the other madams couldn't compare to. Thirdly, letting a little girl do this would make it easier for others to have the idea of underestimating the enemy. If this was the case, it would be equivalent to losing a round before the battle. Because at any time, underestimating the opponent could bring about irreversible consequences. Fourth, and the most important point. Ever since Yuan Xiaoyu became the head of Qiqian City's publicity department, her performance in all aspects was excellent. She had already shown management skills that didn't match her age. This was also why Yang Chendong thought highly of her. Since she could manage the publicity department so well, she could probably complete the self-inspection mission beautifully. And the facts also proved that Yang Chendong's judgment of people was very accurate. Since the beginning of the operation, everything went smoothly. From the telegram sent, from the beginning of the operation until now, they had already investigated various local and military problems. There were 134 cadres, and this number was still expanding. It seemed that there was no end to it. Among these cadres, some had been arrested for corruption, some had abused their power for personal gain, and some had even used their power to abuse their power. For example, they had coerced other women to serve them, and then they would get a good job in exchange for sleeping with them, and so on. Needless to say, as a woman, Yuan Xiaoyu was naturally very angry about this. As long as there was such a leader, once they fell into his hands, he wouldn't even bat an eyelid when arresting people. Sigh. Gently putting down the telegram in his hand, Yang Chendong sighed from his mouth. Qiqian City had only been established for a short period of time, and there were already so many internal problems. This was under Yang Chendong's high salary. It could be imagined that if the salary wasn't high, the number of criminals would be more than doubled. Qiqian City was only a part of an island, and that was it. One could imagine what the officials of the Great Ming Dynasty were like. The so-called "a year of honest magistrate, 100,000 snowflakes silver" was probably the most appropriate description. Yang Chendong was still thinking about some related problems when the curtain of the military tent was pushed open from the outside. Beta Persei, Tai Hu, Bai Zhua, and the others walked in. Suddenly, the military tent became a lot more lively. Everyone is here, find a place to sit. Looking at these elites under his command, Yang Chendong's face showed a smile. Everyone was the first to follow Yang Chendong, so they didn't treat him as an outsider. They each found a place near the stove and sat down. Then they looked at the sixth young master with an expectant look. They knew that there must be something important to discuss, because in the past, when everyone appeared together, there would be more important tasks to carry out. Since they weren't outsiders, Yang Chendong didn't beat around the bush and directly said, "Tiger's Mane has already led the army to Tulu City. If nothing unexpected happens, there will be a good result tomorrow. Perhaps at this time tomorrow, we will be staying in the city. Taking down Tulu City in one day." If someone else said this, they might not believe it, but since it came from Yang Chendong, Tai Hu and the others had no reason to doubt it. Their sixth young master was like this. Once he said something, he would always be able to quickly fulfill it. Yang Chendong had never thought that taking down Tulu City would be difficult. The difficult part was that he would have to enter the capital of Baiming. Although he had the powerful trump card of Daikara, he shouldn't be afraid of any danger. This Daikara was very mysterious and could make him disappear into thin air, just in case. But in the end, he was still a man, not a god. What if he was caught off guard, for example, when he was sleeping at night and his head was cut off? Even if he had Daikara, he wouldn't be able to change the outcome of his death. Although Yang Chendong's perception of danger had reached a whole new level due to the existence of the qi in his heart, and it should have been very difficult for anyone to kill him. However, there was always a chance, and Yang Chendong didn't want to gamble. This was also why he had asked Yang Heir to call Tai Hu and Bai Zhuo over. After taking down Tulu City, I plan to celebrate the new year in the capital of Baiming. There are some things that have to be resolved. Now, I want you to accompany me to the capital. How about it? Are there any difficulties? Yang Chendong still looked at Tai Hu and Bai Zuo with a smile. Although he said that he was asking, he was actually informing them. Not many people knew that Yang Chendong was going to Baiming to celebrate the new year. For example, in the first city, only Yu Mian knew. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei already knew. Therefore, when they heard this news, Tai Hu and Bai Zuo were stunned. It was precisely because they had followed Yang Chendong for a long time that they knew better than anyone else what kind of attitude Baiming had towards the sixth young master. In a sense, Yang Chendong would be the person who would overthrow the great Ming dynasty. This could already be seen from the various signs he had shown. And for such a person, there were probably many people in Baiming and southern Ming who wanted him dead. One could imagine the danger of entering Baiming at this time. As subordinates, whether it was Tai Hu or Bai Zuo, if they had a choice, they all hoped that Yang Chendong would give up on this decision. However, they knew that since the sixth young master had spoken to them so formally, he had already made his decision. What they needed to consider now was not dissuasion, but whether they could ensure the safety of the sixth young master. Chapter 770. No one knew what the current state of the Baiming imperial court was and what their attitude towards Yang Chendong was. Tai Hu and Bai Zuo could not influence those people at all. All they could do was try their best to protect the sixth young master's safety. After about 7 or 8 seconds of silence, Tai Hu and Bai Zuo stood up and gave a very standard military salute to Yang Chendong. Sixth young master, we will do our best. Unless we die, we will not let anyone threaten your safety. Hee, good, good. I understand what you mean. Yang Chendong's smile became wider. This was the result he wanted. As the saying goes, one must always be on guard against people. This time, he went to Baiming's capital with no intention to kill anyone. However, if someone wanted to assassinate him, then sorry, he would have to take some heads and tell the world that the murderer would be killed. The camp of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment had been built. The soldiers of the 3 new regiments had finished clearing the snow. After eating, they quickly went to rest after a day of hard work. Outside the tent, there were only some soldiers of the 2nd Regiment patrolling with torches. Everything looked so tranquil and peaceful. However, a very dangerous aura was sweeping over from the southwest direction. The Tatar cavalry on Saihan Mountain had finally decided to make a move. Mazam was the leader of the Tatar cavalry on Saihan Mountain. When Tatar was glorious, he became a member of the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua's army. He revealed his ability in constant battles and finally became the commander of tens of thousands of troops. Later, Yeshen and Agador conspired to deal with Tuachuo Buhua. Although they did not succeed in the end, the glorious Tatar army fell from prosperity to decline because of this. Mazam led his army back to Saihan Mountain. While accumulating strength, he waited for the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua's summons. However, it seemed that his luck wasn't that good. First, the team he sent to fetch water was robbed by the mercenaries, causing him to be furious. Then, he received news that Agador's 50,000 cavalrymen were defeated. This made him, who originally wanted to teach the first city a lesson, suppress the anger in his heart and wait for another opportunity. He originally thought that even if the opportunity appeared, it would have to wait until spring next year. They never thought that in this season of snow, the mercenaries would suddenly make a move. They actually wanted to attack the city of Nataru. Moreover, the scouts sent news that the front and middle of the mercenaries had already passed by the side of Saihan Mountain. Now, what appeared in front of them was the rear of the mercenaries. Nataru city was his ally and everyone listened to Tuachuo Buhua's orders. However, facing the main army of the mercenaries' main army, Mazam was not confident that he could severely injure them and force them to retreat. He could only watch them pass by him. Until the rear army arrived, he saw hope. Your mercenaries are powerful. They can even defeat the main Tatar army led by Agador. I can't afford to offend them. However, how powerful could your rear army be? Especially when the information from the scouts indicated that there were still 6,000 new recruits in this 8,000-strong mercenary army, Mazam was even more certain that his opportunity had arrived. With the same number of troops, the gap between the recruits and the veterans was very big. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that on the battlefield, in a chaotic battle, even 5 rookies might not be a match for one veteran. This was because they lacked combat experience and didn't know what to do in order to survive better and better. Therefore, under normal circumstances, no matter how many recruits there were, it was difficult for the veterans to pay attention to them. But now, there were only 2,000 veteran mercenaries and 6,000 new recruits. This gave Mazam hope. He called over his most valued general, Boris, and decided to give him 5,000 cavalrymen to launch a surprise attack on the rear of the mercenaries at the foot of the mountain and cut off their escape route. Not only would he be able to take revenge for the water, but it was also equivalent to giving his ally, Amu Gulang, another form of support. After Bila received the order, he immediately gathered 5,000 cavalry and left the city after eating an early dinner. When the sky was completely dark, he was already less than 10 li away from the rear army of the mercenaries. Damn this weather! Looking up at the sky, Bila found that snowflakes had started to fall again. He couldn't help but curse. If it was summer, he would be able to reach the front of the enemy with a few charges. Then he would charge into the enemy's camp and cut off the enemy's head. But now, in such bad weather, the heavy snow had submerged the hooves of the warhorses. How difficult would it be to charge? Pass down the order. Everyone dismount and lead the horses forward. Maintain the strength of the warhorses to the greatest extent and slowly advance forward. Helpless, Bila had no choice but to make such a decision. He threw away the warhorses that had the most advantage. This was originally a helpless matter. Giving up the advantage and engaging in close combat with the enemy. Fortunately, they couldn't ride the warhorses, and the mercenaries were the same. The heavens were very fair and gave everyone the same environment. This way, Bila was still very confident. The snow seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. It seemed like the light snow was about to turn into a heavy snow. Bora and his 5,000 cavalrymen were walking on the snowy ground. From time to time, they would hear the sound of soldiers falling into piles of snow, unable to extricate themselves and calling for help. The army moved slowly. After all, they were on the grasslands and were already used to such bad weather. Therefore, apart from being slower, they were still able to approach the rear army of the mercenaries step by step. After walking for 4 hours, they finally arrived at a place 2 li away from the camp. Due to the heavy snow, the vision of the scouts of the second group was greatly obstructed. Bila's luck wasn't bad. He was able to reach this place without being discovered. However, their luck came to an end. It was impossible for 5,000 cavalrymen to completely fool the enemy. Therefore, their appearance was still discovered by the scouts. Then, a white light suddenly soared into the sky and streaked across the top of Bila's army of 5,000. Flare. The white light instantly illuminated the entire ground and revealed the figures of the 5,000 Tatar cavalry. When the scout saw the number of people on the other side with the help of this flare, the urgent sound of a horn resounded across the land. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The enemy is cavalry. There are around 4,000 to 6,000 of them. After the scouts estimated the enemy's military strength based on their experience, they began to run as fast as they could, shouting and spreading the news. What is that? How can it be so bright? Could it be that the moon has fallen from the sky? The Tatar army that had been alarmed by the flares began to discuss among themselves. They had never seen or even heard of a flare before. At this moment, many of them were trembling in fear. Bila was also shocked by the flare. However, as the main commander, he knew that now wasn't the time to discuss this. How to stabilize the morale of the army and obtain victory was the most urgent matter. All soldiers listen to my order. Charge with me. The enemy only has 2,000 veterans and 6,000 recruits. We launched a surprise attack. They are no match for us. Bila used an extremely bewitching voice to speak. Then, he used his actions as an example and led his horse to charge forward. If Bila could abandon his horse and charge forward with the 5,000 Tatar soldiers, it would be possible for them to launch a surprise attack over a distance of 2 li. They might even be able to obtain victory. However, the grassland warriors trusted their horses too much. They didn't know what kind of consequences such an action would bring. The flare shot into the sky. This scene was clearly seen by the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Ding Shan, who was on night watch. His expression immediately became serious. He said to the soldiers beside him, "It's an enemy attack. Blow the whistle immediately. Everyone, gather." Beep beep beep, beep beep beep, the hurried whistle sounded and spread throughout the entire camp. Out of conditioned reflex, all the soldiers who were still sleeping when they heard the whistle immediately reacted. They got dressed and got up. They took the weapons piled in their tents and rushed out of the camp to gather their troops. The 6,000 new recruits also rushed out of their tents one by one. However, many of the soldiers were still in a sleepy state. There were even some who showed dissatisfaction. During the day, they worked hard to sweep the snow. At night, they still had to conduct an emergency training. Would they still have the strength to work during the day? The soldiers who had such thoughts were not the only one. They all had dissatisfaction on their faces. However, when they saw the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, Luzhua, walk in front of their troops, everyone's expression became serious. They were very clear that if they wanted to gain a foothold in the mercenary army, every performance was very important. They couldn't let the commander see their lazy side. "Soldiers, we have encountered an enemy attack. The enemy is less than 2 miles away from us. Now, everyone, please pick up the weapons in your hands and fight together with the soldiers of the 2nd Regiment. Please remember, this is not a training exercise. This is a real battle." After giving a salute, Luzhua gave a few instructions to the new regiment commander. Then, he strode towards another new regiment. Wow! At this moment, the entire new regiment was like a boiling pot. They thought that it would be like the previous training. They didn't expect that everything was real. Were they going to participate in the battle? When they thought of their families and brothers and sisters who had been waiting for them to make military contributions in the beginning city, all the soldiers' eyes lit up. Ba too was also in this new regiment. Originally, he was also a part of the people who had complaints in his heart. However, now, he didn't have any complaints. There were only sparkling eyes and some were eager to give it a try. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.